About it, okay?
Wow, it's
We'll figure it
worrisome.
out. Don't worry.
Later on, they would decide on pecan trees. We would have 50
Bread, okay.
Here in the low country, and at one point in time, in fact, depending on the style and size of the basket, and resist destroying what was considered their property.
A black lady by the name of Rosa Parks made her personal civil rights stand. A publicized single event that unofficially set the civil rights movement into motion.
What is this?
Strawberry is available at Butterfly Cafe. They're also selling some blueberry. Only moved here in 1955. So just another way to honor Willie.
It's time until several big winds came by and just kept taking out the pecan trees. But for the Harlebecks to have this space for this massive brick production of these cash crops, they had to start growing it out. And they would grow it out to 52,000 acres. That's hard to envision. How large Boone Hall gets under the height of the Harlebeck landmass? Until I found out you can actually drive through most of it. So when you're driving around Mount Pleasant and you just kind of want to eyeball it, go down Long Point to Highway 17, go to Highway 17 to the double stoplight, Highway 41. Turn on Highway 41, go up and around the 6 mile, go through the roundabout at 6 mile, come back to Highway 17. Want to know where they fired those bricks? It wasn't here. Continue down Highway 17, continue down by the Ravenel Bridge. There's a smokestack that still exists as part of a 3-section kiln that the Harlebecks had down by the bridge, although the bridge really wasn't there at that point, but their smokestack was, and that is where they fired all those bricks. And boy, did they get wealthy. Really wealthy, stupidly wealthy, but then it helps when you don't have to pay people. And then the Civil War broke out. And then emancipation. The Harlebecks had a problem there. They went from opulence to dirt poor in the span of the Civil War. So what they did is they sold off some acreage and 2 communities popped up at that point. One is called Phillips on Highway 41 and the other is called 6 Mile on 6 Mile Road, where at this point land is granted by the Harlebecks after emancipation for now they're free people on the plantation where they can go and set up their own communities where their descendants are still living even today. And the Harlebecks would scrape by in the emancipation years, never truly recovering their opulent wealth that they had before the Civil War, and then they found themselves in the Great Depression. So there they were. 1935, last descendants of the Harlebecks sold Boone Hall, determining it was no longer economically feasible for them to keep it. And they sold it to a Canadian diplomat named Thomas Stone. Thomas Stone comes out of Canada, comes here to Boone Hall and wants to party. That's it. He wants to throw parties for his friends and family. But he gets that farmhouse. Thomas is falling down farmhouse and he says, what can I do with that? Answer, nothing. So, a Canadian diplomat hires a New York architect to try to figure out what is a summer training. So when you go inside, just remember, if you diplomat, New York architect, everything's going to make sense. Thomas Stone decided that what he needed was for his guests to make a grand entrance again. There's that entrance theme into every room of the house. So nothing is flat. And you will have to step up and step out of every single room.
That plantation stays in the Boone family for 5 generations, 1681 all the way to 1817. A lot of history there. 1817, another family takes it over. It's a German family. Germans, yes, it was a German family. They came in. You're not related to Horlbecks, are you? This is a family by the name of Horlbeck. And they had come to Charleston about 1750s. A couple of brothers established a building/construction business, and boy did they go to town. By 1817, they were very well established here. And they bought up Boone Hall and Plantation at that time, and they greatly expanded it. Went from about let's see, about 700 acres then to about 4,200 acres under their ownership. The slave population expanded from about 90 under the Boones to about 300 under the Horlbecks. They also expanded the brick-making capabilities, big brickyards. Brickyard was started by the Boones, but Horlbecks just went to town through the 19th century. They were all about business, all about building. They're great historic builders of downtown Charleston. If you have toured through downtown Charleston, without question you've passed by some of those buildings that bear their imprint. All right, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The house and plantation today belongs to the McCrae family. Harris and Nancy McCrae came down from North Carolina in 1955, and they purchased this plantation. And they opened it up to the public that very next year, 1956, to tour the first floor only, while they and their two children lived upstairs in the second and third story of this house. So they had two children in tow. One was William, or Willie as he became known, and the other one was Elizabeth. She was about 13 at the time they moved in here. And you know, there's always one that gets away, goes away in a family. Well, that would be Elizabeth. When she was college age, she went off to New York City and became a Juilliard School of Music trained concert pianist. And she toured Europe performing, came back to the States, toured, performed, and then settled for most of her life in California. Willie was the heart and soul of Boone Hall Plantation. Lived here his entire life, right up to 4 years ago. Unfortunately, he became ill and he passed away 4 years ago this past April. Lived right up there. But he's the heart and soul, the driving factor of why Boone Hall Plantation has risen in such prominence in the greater Charleston area. Expanded our farming operations tremendously. He expanded our role in contributing to great causes through the foundation work we do. And he expanded the plantation's role also as a learning institute. We tour schools through here virtually every day, especially this time of year, and certainly weekly. And we also host talks and lectures about that slave era. What was it like here on these plantations in Charleston during that awful period of our history? And that's so we take great pride in that. We miss Willie and his leadership tremendously. All right, so Elizabeth came back from California, lives here on the property, though not in this house. Lives about a quarter mile in a far more modest, easier to take care of kind of house. Far more modern too. But she comes up periodically. She'll mix with our visitors. Quite engaging woman in her early 80s. And she loves particularly to play this great 9-foot-long Steinway, 1890 Steinway that you're going to see in the library, first room we're going to enter. When the house is quiet, she loves the way the room was built for the acoustics, and you'll see this in just a moment. So she'll come up and she'll play.
Really low right now, so you see all the pluff mud down in there. I'm sure you can smell it too, and if you look at the flow of the water, the tide is coming in. So if you came down here in another hour or so, you'd see a good bit less of that pluff mud. This is called Boone Hall Creek, and it's a salty, brackish water. We've got lots of fish, shrimp, oysters, and crab out here in this water. And up until 1929, this was your highway. There were no roads or bridges to get you from Mount Pleasant to downtown Charleston. Only way to get downtown was by water. This Boone Hall Creek takes you to Wampachine Creek to get you over to the Wando River. That carries you to the Copper River to get you downtown. So it's about 8 miles by water. What's now a 15 to 20 minute drive could take you up to 6 hours in those old flat bottom boats depending on the tides. And if you see the marsh grass out here, usually around mid to late September, when the weather starts to cool down, it turns yellow. Now that we're in spring, it's getting back to its normal bright green. Big white tent to the right, that's our band shell. Every December we have a wine festival out here in this field. It's called Wine Under the Oaks. There's a sunrise Easter service every Easter Sunday, and then on the Sunday prior to the Super Bowl, we host the world's largest oyster roast with normally about 10,000 people. They'll bring in around 45 to 50,000 pounds of oysters. That structure is hurricane proof as well. After a Dahlia came through here back in September, I believe it's now been through 7 hurricanes. Going to have some real nice marsh views up here to your left in the clearances between the trees. So if you're looking for a good marsh photo, this is a great spot. You've got salt water to your left and about to have fresh water to your right. We're coming across our largest freshwater pond on the property. This is a man-made pond, and all the irrigation for our crops come from this pond. On that first raft here, there's a group of yellow-bellied turtles. And if you look on the second raft, along with those turtles, there's an alligator laying on it. Not too terribly big a one. It's maybe about 4 feet long. For each foot in length, an alligator is going to have 1 inch between its eyes. So if it's a 6 foot long alligator, it's going to have about 6 inches between its eyes. Up here at the Butterfly Cafe, we've got a tape measure you're more than welcome to borrow if you'd like to come down here to measure the distance between an alligator's eyes. Just make sure you return it when you're finished. These white birds inside of this tree are egrets. We've got 2 egret nests inside of this tree. They just hatched some eggs a few weeks ago. There's another alligator right underneath that palm. Just to give you some history of the property, when the Boone family got here, it took them several years to get this place cleared of brush and trees and get a house built. The first source of income was timber. Just sold the wood from those trees they had chopped down. Then in the 1730s, started planting indigo, which is a plant that goes into the production of ink and dye. Produces a blue ink, which is where we got the color of our state flag. Then we went and picked a fight with our best customer. England bought about 90% of the indigo. So after the Revolutionary War ended, so did the indigo industry. Shortly after indigo, also started planting cotton, and I'll get more into that in a few minutes. Right about that same time, they had a small brickyard where they were producing a decent amount of bricks. Then the Horlbeck family purchased this property in 1817. When the Horlbecks took over, they expanded that brick-making operation to where they were cranking out over 4 million bricks a year. So if y'all have been to either pronunciation of that word, which is always up for debate. A lot of you may know it as pecan, but in this region, the actual Native American pronunciation is pecan, which means a hard nut to crack. This comes from the Wapu and Wando communities, which were indigenous to this area. Tomato, tomato, right? And I should mention the current owners of this property are the McCrae family, who have owned the property since 1955. And Willie McCrae, he was the real patriarch and was quite the squire. Willie passed away in April of 2020, but before he passed away, he was able to get all this land protected in what's called a conservation easement. So everything you see out here will stay just the way it is. No developer can come out here and purchase any of this property and turn it into a golf course or a mall or a neighborhood or anything like that. I mentioned that little oak tree back there crossing the creek with the plaque next to it. That tree was planted in Willie's memory a few years ago. All the crops that we grow during the course of the year, some of which you'll see on this ride today, this is all Willie's vision. And this never was a rice plantation. They never did grow rice for profit here, unfortunately, because that's where the money was. You could do very, very well growing rice. Don't know if y'all visited any of the other plantation homes on the other side of town along the Ashley or seen any of the larger homes downtown on the Battery, but a lot of those came from rice money, and they tried to grow rice here, but it did not go well. The reason for that is because everything out here is just too salty. The air, the water, the soil, they all have too much salt content. So to grow rice, you have to go a bit more inland and closer to the fresh water. And as far as what all we grow now, our biggest crop is strawberries. Strawberry season here started up late February and actually just ended a couple days ago. Each April we'll have our own annual Low Country Strawberry Festival, rides and games for the kids to kick off the spring. In addition to strawberries, we'll use several varieties of tomatoes, Carolina sweet onions, which are similar to a Vidalia onion, silver queen corn, bell peppers, banana peppers, jalapenos, and different types of chilies, yellow squash, summer squash, zucchini, cucumbers, blueberries, grapes, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, pinchon melons, peaches, and eggplant. Just planted our first citrus trees a couple months ago, some lemons, limes, and oranges. Then in the fall and winter, we do hardier things like broccoli, turnips, cabbage, collard greens, and okra. Each October, we do a month-long fall festival that'll go on every to the left after we make this turn. You'll see an aerial view map of what the corn maze looked like about 6 to 7 months ago. In this area to the left, this is where we hold our Strawberry Festival each April, as well as our Fall Festival each October. That tin roof building up there is our produce store, Willie's Roadside Market, which we do close it down each year just before Christmas because we don't have anything in season once the collard greens are done. Then we open back up late February once strawberry season starts back. So anything we grow can be bought up there at Willie's. And all the soil that you're seeing on this ride is all natural. We don't bring soil in from anywhere else due to fear of contamination and diseases. That first field is more sunflowers, and then we've got some recently planted Silver Queen corn here in this second field. The field just past the corn, that was one of our strawberry fields planted back in October. They just started drying up the last week or so. And earlier I mentioned the Horlbeck family growing this property to over 4,000 acres. Like that neighborhood we drove through a few minutes ago, bits and pieces have been sold off over the years, so this property is now 738 acres. Like I mentioned, Willie did get all this protected so the acreage will never change. Just to give you a size comparison, this property is approximately 100 acres smaller than Central Park in New York City. This field on the head of the left, going from the mound up to the highway and then over to the tree line, was our largest field of tomatoes this past summer, until tomato season ended in the middle of August. We always hate it when tomato season's over with, right? Had right about 10 acres total of tomatoes in 2023. The sandy soil here really makes for great tomatoes. And then up here to the right, this one of our tomato fields for this spring and summer, planted a couple months ago. Staked them a few weeks ago, getting some good flowers and tomatoes popping up out of these plants, so that's exciting. These are all vine ripes in this field. And about 6 weeks ago, all of these fields were covered in buckwheat, which we use as a cover crop. So the buckwheat gets planted in the fall, then it grows out over the winter. Come early spring, they mow it all down where it mulches into the ground to provide nutrients into the soil. So over the winter months when we don't have a whole lot growing, these fields are all being prepped for our spring and summer crops. Last summer, this field was sunflowers. When sunflowers are in season, we open these fields up to the public to let people come out here to clip their own, and they're also very helpful for pollination. However, like those tomato plants, once that August heat got a hold of them, they started to wilt, and we had to cut them down. Summer of 22, this field had yellow squash and cantaloupe. 2021, this is one of our strawberry fields. So 21 going into 22, we have 14 acres of strawberries, and they planted over 120,000 strawberry plants. 22 going into 23 had 18 acres, planted over 150,000 strawberry plants. Takes them about 5-6 days to get those planted. And Willie always wanted the kids to be involved, wanted them to know what they're eating and how things are grown. So to open up our picking season, he'd let the kids come out here, come pick strawberries and take them home with them, which we've continued that tradition as another way to honor Willie. Up ahead on either side of you is a moat that was dug by enslaved people during the Civil War to keep Union soldiers from invading this property. This moat extends over 2 miles, and in some areas it's up to 30 feet deep. I believe I may have mentioned this to y'all a few minutes back as we were riding along the cotton field, but there never was any actual battle on this property during the Civil War. It stayed working continuously as a commercial farm. The reason for that is because at that time, this area was so undeveloped that it was just woods and swamp. So it was just about impossible to even get to this property from the north, so it really benefited from being so isolated. This is why General Sherman had to bring his troops across Georgia and up from Savannah to get to Charleston. Even when I was a little kid, if you came out to Boone Plantation, you were way out in the country, and it's now considered central Mount Pleasant, so it gives you an idea of how much development has come through this area in the last 25-30 years or so. Field of strawberries up ahead. Like I said, they're drying out, but we still got a few hangers on in this field. I know a lot of places can keep their strawberry plants up year-round, and we're just not able to do that here because of the heat. They cannot take the heat of the Charleston summers, so we plant our strawberries each October, ready for harvest late February. The first ones go to Willie's Roadside Market, and then once it warms up a bit, late March, early April, we open these fields up to the public to let people come out here to pick their own. We do 3 varieties of strawberry: Ruby June, Camino Real, and Frontera. And a strawberry is the only fruit that has the seeds on the outside. An entire upside down tree under each one that's under the ground, and they're all interwoven with each other. And if one of these oaks gets sick or infected, another oak can provide nutrients to that sick tree through the roots. A couple more advantages they have with hurricanes is the big gaps between the limbs, which allows the wind to pass through those large gaps, as well as the low center of gravity. This empty spot to the right, that's where Hugo took the one tree out. No use in trying to replace it though, because he'd never catch up in size with all the others. And there are 2 plants that naturally grow in these trees. The first, which I'm sure you've noticed, is the Spanish moss. It's neither Spanish nor moss, it's actually part of the pineapple family, as weird as that sounds. It's an airborne plant that grows right in these trees, does not harm them in any way, just needs a little sun and some water, and they've been up in these trees for hundreds of years. Henry Ford used to stuff the seats of his first cars with Spanish moss, which was also used for packaging. Legend has it the name came from when the conquistadors came over from Spain, that the Native Americans thought the Spanish moss resembled the conquistadors' beards. We do see a lot of people like to take some home with them as a souvenir for some reason, and that's fine if you want to do that. But if you take some with you, you want to pull it straight from the tree. Don't ever pick it up off the ground. When it gets into the ground is when the chiggers get in it. Chiggers are a ground bug, so if you decide to take some with you, just pull it directly from the tree. The next plant that grows in these trees are the green leaves all over the limbs, and it's called resurrection fern. It's got a nice green color to it right now because we had a good bit of rain a couple days ago. When we hadn't had rain in about a week, they shrivel up and turn brown. And then after a good rain, within hours, open up to turn bright green again. hence the name Resurrection. All these trees were planted by enslaved people starting in 1743 when they were owned by Thomas Boone. These trees are right around the 280-year range. When Thomas Boone passed away, his family thought it would be appropriate to have him buried underneath his trees. So just up ahead to the right, you'll see Thomas Boone's gravesite. Only owner to be buried on this property. I'm sure you've noticed that in the front yard of the house they were setting up for a wedding, which we do well over 100 weddings a year out here. The ceremonies are typically done underneath these trees or the front yard of the house.